To say that Kingdom Hearts is a ridiculous franchise is almost passé at this point.
What are you talking about?
It's those games with complicated lore and tonal dissonance.
Say, fellas, did somebody mention the door to darkness?
At this point, everybody knows. To borrow a phrase, Kingdom Hearts isn't that complicated, it's just a lot to remember. But this popular perception of the franchise has spawned the equally popular counter-narrative that, sure, Kingdom Hearts looks really dumb, but it's actually kind of dark and deep if you look at it, bro, which has almost become just as overstated as the Kingdom Hearts is stupid narrative. What Kingdom Hearts is dramatic, overeager, and best of all, unapologetic. So, I'm not going to try to spend too much time convincing you that Kingdom Hearts is good or not bad or whatever. At this point, you're either on board for the Kingdom Hearts formula, or you're not. I'm just going to tell you about my favorite game. 358 over 2 Days is exemplary of many of the franchise's best qualities. Or 358 Days over 2. Whatever. Days wasn't my first Kingdom Hearts game. My intro to the series was actually the even more awkward starting point and the even more cryptic chain of memories on the Game Boy Advance. It appeared in my house one day. I don't ever remember buying or receiving it. So when I played it, I had no context, no idea who these people were or what past events were being referenced. So maybe it was meant to be. But by the time I'd bought Days of my own accord, I'd spent enough time watching cutscene compilations on YouTube and reading the Kingdom Hearts wiki that 358 meant something to me. Days was the first game that felt mine. I love the stupidly charming emotive text boxes and crunchy graphics and the tedious missions and the panel system and Roxas's stupid run and the persistent sense of dread throughout. Maybe less deserving of my affections are Infernal Engine or Ruler of the Sky battles, or those missions where you have to follow Pete without invading his personal space. But Days has this immersive melancholy that feels unique even among Kingdom Hearts games. With all the things that don't work about this game on a technical level, there are so many that do for the story.
Ta-da!
Before we jump into the juicy story stuff, a more minor point. The Keyblades in Days are really unique. You may not be able to do the flashiest combos with them, but you will look very, very cool. From the design to the incredibly symbolic names, I'm just obsessed with the whole arsenal of them. They feel very much like something I would have scribbled in my notes as an 11-year-old, and very at home with the general 2009 Hot Topic vibe of the organization. Days also gets points for giving us the incredible piece of Kingdom Hearts iconography when you briefly get to dual-wield Oathkeeper and Oblivion at the end of the game. If only you could do that in real life. I actually have a tattoo of a Days-specific Keyblade. If you can guess which one, I'll reward you by being really impressed. Days has the most intense emotional impact because, like I said, I find it the most immersive game in the franchise. And this is thanks to the very structure and pacing of the game. Gameplay consists of missions, which range from investigating crusts on castle walls, to mindlessly smashing enemies, to getting the shit kicked out of you by monochrome versions of yourself. Not exactly the stuff grand adventures are made of. And that's what sets Days apart.
The name Roxas, and the number 13 were all I had.
You're not Sora, and you're not even Riku the anti-hero. You're a depressed, semi-conscious newborn boy doing errands for a cryptic and aloof cult. And unlike other games with a goal and a villain to defeat, there's not really a clear idea of why you're doing what you're doing.
Who the people around me were, what they wanted, or what they were trying to do. I had no idea.
Which is exactly the point. Every other Kingdom Hearts game has this nebulous sense of time, but Days breaks it down for you, literally day by day. Each with the same exact beginning, middle, and usually end. This forces you to slow down, to think of each mission as one contained day. So regardless of how fast you play the game, you'll be forced to consider each set of missions as a self-contained 24 hours. And in this way, the player gets to experience things exactly as Roxas would, tedious and repetitive. The monotony becomes a feature of the game, not a bug. And this is only emphasized by the game's gloomy ambiance. The castle is sterile and alienating, and feels too big, especially when the org membership gets halved really early in the game. The furniture is boxy and unfriendly, and beds have no blankets. No one really likes talking to you. It's just Roxas, an unfriendly castle, and the next mission. So, when Roxas has his first mission with Axel, you feel how much of a lifeboat it is to this poor kid, just to have someone want to talk to him. In the middle of this weird, frigid institution, Axel extends a little frozen olive branch, this tiny spark of humanity. And so Roxas, sweet, sweet boy, immediately takes it upon himself to do the same for the other office pariah. If they can choose to be kind to each other, maybe the organization doesn't have to feel so empty. And the very premise that we're sold on, the idea that these are people incapable of emotion, is immediately, obviously untrue. At first, Roxas had nothing to look forward to. Now he has two things. And so Roxas and the player have fundamentally the same motivation. The missions become a means to an end. Complete one, and you get to hang out with your friends for a little while. It also helps that Days lacks that sense of adventure from the other games. Rather than exploring worlds, you're doing a job. You're not going anywhere, you're settling into a routine, and making the best of it because it allows you to have a few minutes of peace with people you like. You'll spy on some Disney characters, get condescended to by the edgelord of the day, and watch a perpetual sunset. Not much, but enough to keep going. This creates a slow pace that puts you again directly in Roxas's shoes, and gives you the small comfort of predictability. But more importantly, it gives you and Roxas something to lose. Because you can never get too comfortable, right? The clock is always counting. With every boring day, that number on the box gets closer. What's going to happen at 358? You know instinctively that it can't end well, because we already know Roxas's fate from Kingdom Hearts 2, and Xion is nowhere to be found in future games. The characters even spell it out for you.
Well, nothing lasts forever, you know. Least of all for a bunch of nobodies like us.
So you get this sense of dread as the days increase, because on one hand, it means more time with Axel and Xion. On the other, it means advancing toward that something bad you know is coming. At the start of the game, we find out Cyax has instructed Roxas to keep a journal, which, story-wise, is for his data collection, but it gives us direct insight into Roxas's thoughts. It's such a simple and effective tool for world building. I love it. The first-person descriptions tell us not just recaps of what happened, but how they felt. Since Roxas is a perfect newborn fish out of water, we get a bunch of journal entries that elaborate on the nature of hearts and nobodies and
darkness.
So it's not just a lore dump, but an explanation of the lore in a way that emotionally matters to the player. In contrast with the numbered titles and Chain of Memories, games where you play as the relentlessly optimistic protagonist, Days puts you on the side of the established villains. Which includes being at least co-worker chummy with characters Sora methodically slaughtered in succession. It's a fun little exercise in perspective, to see who these people are when they're not melodramatically taunting you. Like, sure, Xigbar is a bit of a bully, and Cyax is a straight-up dick, but Demyx? Even Luxord gets this weird, fun uncle relationship in the late game. And the intro is fantastic. It's all very edgy AMV, from the intro card to each member's little freeze-frame bio. The melodrama of it all is inherently a little goofy. The fact that there's all these powerful, dramatic freaks living together in this giant castle, like, no wonder they made a manga about it.
I am me! Nobody else!
The setting and premise of the game alone also lead to some really fun philosophical questions. Already, spending time with an alternative perspective shakes up any ideas of clean-cut morality. You literally begin every day in a section called the Gray Area. Kingdom Hearts' attempts at have always swung on a pendulum between incoherent and surprisingly thoughtful.
I'm me, he says.
For a good example of this, check out regular Pat's Chain of Memories video, which I wholeheartedly concur with. But regardless of the success of the execution, the series in general does play with some really interesting ideas. And by virtue of centering around nobodies, Days is particularly good at this. The nobodies are actually one of the coolest concepts in the series. They're easy villains, but when we pull back the curtain in Days, it's honestly more sad than anything else. Days poses the questions, what constitutes a self, and how much of that comes from our environment? From where do we craft identity and purpose? What does it mean to pursue power, and how does it insulate you from connection? I'm not saying it has the most subtle or original takes on these ideas, but they're there nonetheless. I love that Roxas and Xion are inherently tragic characters, because while they search for identity, they're people who fundamentally don't belong to themselves. There's that tragic irony in the fact that they find purpose through each other when who they really are means they can never coexist. They're pieces of something else more important, the actual protagonist. And getting to experience this up close in the game adds dramatic weight to Sora's whole arc, getting to see that there are very real sacrifices necessary to uphold his heroism. Kingdom Hearts dialogue ranges from stilted, deep-fried Google Translate to unintentionally hilarious to occasionally profound. Pieces of 3 even border on witty, but Days is charming, and sometimes funny. With very little voice acting, this is maybe some of the most natural dialogue in the series, and it's a crime it got hacked down to pieces for the movie in Kingdom Hearts 1.5. Chats with members in the common room, little asides while in the worlds, and the clock tower conversations are all bursting with personality. And this leads to enormous amounts of character building for the trio, but also for everyone else. I find Roxas and Xion's mutual protectiveness and Axel's big brothering of the two of them disgustingly endearing. The fuzzy friendship stuff is the heart of the game, but we also get peeks into the darker, bitter side of interpersonal relationships. Sykes' deteriorating partnership with Axel and his whole jealous ex routine feels like some of the more mature writing in the series. I love the nods to their shared history, and sure, maybe the truth of it all was retroactively filled out in future entries, but I still think it's deliciously dramatic and mysterious. The voice acting is also pretty impressive by Kingdom Hearts standards. It has some of the best. Jesse McCartney and Alison Stoner especially carry it in the handful of fully voice-acted scenes. In fact, I think one of the few redeeming things about the Days movie is the addition of this voiced cutscene that McCartney absolutely kills.
I hardly know who I am. What is so wrong with wanting some answers?
Enormous fan. All of the standard monotony of the game makes the devastating climax even more intense.
Roxas is your name.
We'll all have ice cream together. I can't wait to tell Axel this.
By letting yourself get too attached
This
to
isn't
him.
like her.
We're best friends.
What remains if a
Look
nobody
like you've
is
seen a
destroyed?
ghost.
Does the past mean nothing
Seriously,
to you?
where is she?
Did it break
You
again?
have to take care of Roxas.
Somebody knows where I came from.
I always get stuck with the icky jobs?
Where did I think I could go?
Roxas, I'm out of time.
This is still maybe my favorite stretch in any Kingdom Hearts game. From the minute Xion runs away, nothing is ever the same. I'm always struck by how lonely the late game feels. Missions are mostly solo, clock tower visits are sparse and quiet, and Xion's return to the organization never feels quite right. And you can't even be surprised. It was never going to last. You just never knew when. By the time everything falls apart, it's built up so much momentum that you know there's no going back.
They're gonna destroy you!
Please don't hold back, Axel. Promise.
I still get chills. And the whole time, you're Roxas, desperately believing he can hold it all together by sheer force of will. It's devastating. The last act of the game has this tangible hopelessness that's really something to experience the first time. Roxas's fragile little family broken, his sense of trust gone, he goes to the last and really only place he felt content. Because maybe if he sits there like he used to, he could pretend everything is alright. But the clock is still counting down.
Roxas, I'm out of time.
That is so haunting. Honestly, I don't love how the remaster decided to score this scene with the beginning of Vector to the Heavens. It's infinitely more impactful with just the heavy, stunned silence. Letting us guess, letting us wonder what's going to happen next, rather than telling us through the music. But this is the entire game summed up in one line. I'm out of time. Because that's it. They've always been on borrowed time, enjoying scraps of peaceful moments while the inevitable crept closer. It's always been about these three friends and the delicate impermanence of it all. This last act is a mini boss rush, but with zero sense of triumph. It just pummels you with bad and then worse. On paper, it's similar in this way to Birth by Sleep, but when I compare the two in my mind, I easily prefer Days. There's just something about the smaller and more personal stakes that hits me much harder. Because here, there's no grand battle, there's no heroic standoff. Just friends undone by their circumstances, doing the worst possible things to each other. Loss without the ability to mourn. One last battle, and you don't even win. You just lead Roxas back where you left him in the Kingdom Hearts 2 prologue. Before Kingdom Hearts 3, this was it. Remember Roxas, that tragic character with a tragic end? Well, actually, it was even worse. We have the solace of Kingdom Hearts 3 now, but this was 2009. Even with whatever hints or speculation, it would still be another 12 years until any of this was undone. Days ends, and this is all you get. Everything we've done this whole game erased. Not even the courtesy of a memory.
Only 7 days to go, and then my summer vacation's over.
Days is something I would pretentiously categorize as an experience first and game second. It's that lucky case in which even the clunkier aspects of the game work in its favor. And sure, arguably, a game has the responsibility to be fun to play, first and foremost. Unexciting or frustrating gameplay isn't better by virtue of if you think it enhances the story. But it's a similar feeling that I have towards any first-person walking simulator that prioritizes story over gameplay. If the story is good, there's a lot that won't bother me. And story-wise, Days was a complete success for me. It accomplished two things. First, it made Roxas my favorite character, because he's cool and edgy, for sure, but also largely just because I got to know him so well, because I got to spend so much time in his head, something that I never really got from the other characters in the same way. And second, this trio's reunion in Kingdom Hearts 3 made me cry harder than any other Kingdom Hearts moment. And that's 100% thanks to the setup in this game. I believed in the anguish of these people. I believed in their friendship and in the relief of their reunion. Their conflict felt comparatively more intimate. At its core, Days is a simple story. 3 people trying to hold on to friendship despite its limited shelf life. Of being in absolute shit, fucked up circumstances, and still trying to make the best of it. To give each other even just a little bit of comfort, even just for a little while. I'm a big fan of the concept of liminality and liminal spaces, these places that aren't quite one thing or another, but sites of transition. Places that we don't go to for what they are, but as places between, right? And that's this whole game. Staying in the organization is just a means to spend time with Axel and Shion. And so the melancholy of Days is that same feeling as a gas station in the middle of a night on the highway, or an empty school hall, or waiting for a bus. Days is this game with this persistent feeling of unsteadiness, of holding your breath, of waiting to exhale but never being able to. Everything about this game is liminal. Its place in the series, it's a midquel, its internal narrative, its themes of fragility. Roxas's special spot is in perpetual twilight. It's beautiful but frozen in time. Nobodies are in between existence and non-existence. It's everywhere. It's all very harmonious in a way I enjoy a lot. It's very Hadestown, it's a sad song with a predetermined ending, but one you're compelled to play anyway. Regardless of whether you think the weight of this was undone by Kingdom Hearts 3, for me, the impact of Days still holds up. Like Twilight Town, this game lives in my head with a perpetual, nostalgic amber glow. Days isn't the best Kingdom Hearts game, but it is my favorite.